Okay, today we're going to talk about plot. All right, so understanding plot can help us a lot when it comes to trying to understand any film. So, what is plot? What is that? Right? So, many times we get confused with the idea that plot is story, but story is really how the events take place and how they're told. Plot is actually the structure of that story. And basically we have some little key points that they must occur within a given story. So we have plot, and then that's the structure. So it's the shape of that story and the events that lead us to the end. So you might be asking yourself, well, why does plot really matter? So we said that there's a minimum of two characters in any film, the protagonist and the antagonist. And now it doesn't mean that there have to be two people or whatever, but there are two characters. There's the protagonist, someone who wants something, and the antagonist, someone who wants something opposite of that or wants to stop the protagonist. So if that's true, there are a minimum of two characters. There are a minimum of two parts to any film, and that is character. Without character, there is no story, there is no film. And then the other one is plot. There has to be some kind of structure. Maybe you've seen some films where the story jumps around and the film finishes and you're left just wondering, whoa, what? What just happened? This happened and that happened and they went back and they did this, and it's just confusing to you, and worse than confusing, it's unsatisfying. So a good film is going to follow a plot, and that plot, it's that's the things that affect and motivates the protagonist or the other characters, but mainly the protagonist. The plot is the structure of the protagonist's journey through the film. Right? So it connects the events and it connects them in some orderly fashion, so it's a little less confusing. And it also creates this desire in us as that plot moves along. It creates this desire in us to continue to watch the story and see how it's going to unfold. And it helps us to connect to the main character and to other characters actually as it goes through, because there's logic to the events that are occurring, and we can grow attached to and accustomed to that character because of that. And we get this sense, the plot gives us sense of urgency. It gives us this sense that something is happening and something must happen and something will happen, and that's what attaches us and it keeps our interest in the story. So that's why plot matters. What are the key elements then of plot? There are basically five main elements that we're going to talk about. And of course, within each of these, there are lots of little sub elements and different parts that happen. But the key parts, and this is true, doesn't matter what kind of story. We're not talking about genre, right? So that's a that's a completely different way to break them down, to break films down, because even within the genre, there will be some of the same basic kinds of plots, and then all genres have their own plot structures. So there are still five main elements, just like it doesn't matter where you go to eat. If you go to eat at a very nice restaurant, you get appetizers, a salad, the main course, some side dishes, and the dessert, right? So that kind of idea, right? That food might be different in different nice restaurants, but those other things are going to basically remain about the same. Okay, so the key elements are the exposition. And exposition is kind of the talking part, right? Introduction, then rising action, then climax, then falling action, and then the resolution or the conclusion. So let's talk about those a little more in depth. one at a time. So exposition or introduction, of course, that's the beginning of the story. And when the story starts, we need to be introduced to not just the story, but we need to be, or the characters, but we need to be introduced to the setting and the story, what kind of story it's going to be and where it's going to take place, and maybe even why these characters are involved in this particular story. And we need that conflict, whatever the conflict, the main problem. And all films are about problems. There is a problem. Boy wants the girl, right? Harry needs to defeat Voldemort, whatever that is, right? So every film has conflict, some main problem, whether it's someone who's trying to win the game or someone who's trying to become the best or get a scholarship or whatever that is. The word conflict can be a little confusing, that sometimes it seems really, really negative, right? Something about fight, but basically conflict just means what we said before: protagonist, antagonist. Protagonist wants something, the antagonist wants a different something, or to stop that protagonist from getting what he wants, or what the antagonist wants is directly opposed to the protagonist. So conflict just means that there's a difference between the desires of two separate elements, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bloody fist fight, okay? But it does mean that there is a problem, and that's essential. Without the problem, then the story is flat. If boy meets girl, they fall in love, they live happily ever after, at the end. Well, that's not very interesting to us, right? So we hope our life goes that way. Our life goes that way, but we're not interested in stories that play out that way. So we're going to stay with the stories longer if we're introduced to them very quickly. What's happening? Where is it happening? Why is it happening? What's the big issue? And we need to know that fairly soon, and that's going to happen in the very first part. And that doesn't matter whether it's what kind of story it is. So first part, exposition, introduction. Next part is the rising action. So now that we've been introduced to the problem, then now we start to understand why it's a problem and why our hero, the protagonist, can't solve that problem, whatever that is. So those things, it's not just one, okay, boy meets girl, they have a little fight, they get back together at the end. Again, it's not that simple. It can't be that simple. It has to be, there's an issue, there's a bigger issue, there's a bigger and bigger issue, there's a bigger and bigger issue, and that continues on. It doesn't matter what kind of story it is. So we get rising action. So by rising here, it means that the stakes, the results of failure start to seem more and more and more, and the problems also get bigger. So the main characters have been established, and now we're going to get the events and the complication of events as they start to build through this part of the story. And then we get the climax. Now, climax is that peak, right? It's the very, very top. And so we're not saying that it's not divided equally, right? The 5 parts. In fact, the introduction is very small, and then the rising action tends to be fairly long, and then there's the climax, and then we're going to have, so we're on part 3, climax. Climax isn't the middle. That would be, unless it's what, Return of the King. Return of the King is kind of like that. The climax is in the middle, and then we spend 40 more minutes with that film telling some other story and kind of wrapping things up. So the climax is going to come near the very end of the story, and that's the main point, the turning point of the story. And this is where it's not the finish, but it's the highest amount of stress and tension in the story. And at that point, we should be starting to really wonder, oh no, what's going to happen? How can this turn out? And then we get the falling action. And the falling action is not just falling down, but it's the story is starting to come together, and some of the problems are becoming resolved. So basically, all of the problems will be resolved, will be solved as we go through this part, and the outcome or the result of the hero's journey, the hero's actions. I'm using hero here just as protagonist, right? So the protagonist's actions, the results of his actions or her actions, can be seen at this stage in the falling action. And then we get the end. And it's important that there is some kind of closing, complete closing to the story. Uh, Sometimes you could even see right there, right on the end, just a signal to the viewer, to the audience, that oh, okay, that was it, that's the end. And we want to make sure that at the end in a story that all of the different little parts of the story have been completely closed at this point. All right, so those are the 5 key points that we get to us. And knowing those key points, that's very important. It does help us. It helps us to understand the story, because if we don't have those key points, then we can't have as an easy a time of trying to compare one story to another, one film to another. And then, does the story succeed? Does the film succeed? Does it rise? Does it bring us in? Does it make us care about the main character? So having these plot elements and having these plot points are essential for us to be able to critique and understand what any film is, and it's especially important when it comes to trying to compare them. So we can now, if the film meets these plot basic elements, then we can begin to think about it a little more critically, not just about uh, the superficial, the external kinds of things about the story. Oh, yes, this line was funny, or yes, this person was tough looking, or those simple kinds of things, right? Now we can start to think about, does it succeed in what its attempt is? And good film always has an attempted purpose, right? It's trying to tell us something or show us something, something good, something bad, or something that maybe we should stop doing or start doing, or something along those lines. And if we don't know what we're looking for, then we really can't know whether or not that was a success. Okay, so knowing those key points is really, really important for us. And it helps us to be able to compare one film to another film, and it helps us to even think more critically about this film. Oh, should this have happened? Is there enough here for us to believe that this is the outcome, right? And this is the proper outcome for this story, for this hero, for this antagonist as well. All right, so those are the 5 key points of plot. Let's talk more about what kinds of plots there are.